Evening everyone, and welcome to today's installation of the Planning, Transport and Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before we begin, I will remind everyone that we are being filmed and we will be up on the Council's website, so if you have any problems with that, then please leave now. Otherwise, we'll go straight into the agenda. The first item is apologies for absence. I've not received any. Have you received any, Kenna?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies for Councillor Kelly and Councillor Carter is substituting.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 2, and that's the minutes of the last meeting. Do we have any comments on the minutes of the last meeting? No, so they can be approved. Good stuff. Next item is items of urgent business, and I've not received any, so we shall move on to declarations of interest. Has anyone got any declarations they'd like to make? Councillor Gledhill.
All the items on the agenda this evening would have come in front of me as leader. However, as always, I'm open-minded to all the reports here. I've made no fixed point on any aspect or any point of the reports.
Thank you. So we shall move on to Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, obviously, I am the ward councillor, so I do know about this regeneration programme, but I'm pretty open to conversations as well.
Fantastic. So the first item is item 5, first report. It can be found on page 9 of the agenda pack. And I shall... Have we got Mike here to present, or is it... It's Kevin. Okay, Kevin.
Chair, perhaps it would be useful if there's a number of officers in here that are either new to members or new to the committee that might want to introduce themselves before they do their item.
If we go round this direction...
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Lee Nicholson, Assistant Director for Planning, Transport and Public Protection.
Good evening. Matt Kiley, Strategic Lead for Transportation Services. Navtesh Chung, Strategic Transport Manager.
Good evening, Councillors. Kevin Munderley, Assistant Director of Regeneration and Place Delivery. Okay. I'm just conscious. This is an update on the Perfleet Regeneration Programme. It's not been back to this oversight committee for some time, so just to give you a broad update where we are and what the work programme going forward for the next 3 months. Executive summary, just setting out the principal reason why the scheme is being brought forward. 2,650 new homes plus a new town centre, school and supporting community infrastructure. In terms of actually the council's involvement, is that's clearly set out within an existing development agreement which has been signed between ourselves and PCRL, which is the private sector-led entity that's leading the development, and a lot of our involvement is around the sort of management of the Housing Infrastructure Fund, in terms of actually making sure that that's been used to bring forward enabling infrastructure. Members will recall that £75.1 million grant, which we manage via a grant determination agreement, as well as a development agreement with PCRL, and that sets out what we do and what they do, and it's the clear benchmarks as such. That brings us to setting the scene. In terms of actually I would actually add, in terms of actually where we are, there has been a number of developments on the scheme. The first phase 1A, which I think was brought back before, is delivering 34 units of affordable homes. That's on site at the moment. I would draw your attention to issues under paragraph 3. That one of the 3.1, one of the conditions of the development agreement is for PCRL, the private sector partner, to bring forward private sector equity at a certain phase of the development, and for that to happen, that needs to happen for the scheme to progress through future phases. At 3.2, PCOL have engaged with the private sector funding market, and they have actually gone through that process and selected a potential partner, and they're actually in the process of a due diligence with the selected funding provider. Where we are at the moment is they have approached us, and we are going through that due diligence from our side. Position is further complicated by the current best value improvement plan, or the improvement plan that the council's having to go through at the moment, and that's looking at all our capital schemes and borrowing commitments. So the current review of the funding provider is taking place within the context of that wider review, and that work is progressing as we speak. And obviously the results will be reported internally and then through to the council committees in due course. A couple of things I would point out in terms of actually the council is still working through land acquisitions, which is part of our responsibility in the development agreement. We've just recently concluded a land acquisition with Network Rail, which would deliver a key part of the town centre element of the scheme. And another issue is that Swan, which is one of the major shareholders in PCRL, are due to merge with Sanctuary Housing, I think, at the end of this month. So that is where we are in relation to the schemes at this current time.
Thank you for presenting the report, Kevin. I do have quite a number of questions, not least because I don't think 2.5 pages on this subject is adequate. But I'm conscious. I know there are a number of members here that really want to get stuck into this report, so I'm going to go straight to the committee, and I'm going to go to the councillor for West Thurrock.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kevin. I've got a few questions. First of all, is the 75.1 million ring-fenced for PCRL as well as like down there on that site? Or is that 75.1 million can be used on other things?
That 75, the Housing Infrastructure Fund is actually allocated from Homes England, and it's directly for the Purfleet scheme only. So in terms of actually the programme, there's, I think, £25 million of that funding has actually already been drawn down, and there's a programme, an infrastructure programme, which is made up of new roads and or infrastructure in terms of upgrades within the first phases, and land acquisition. So that's been allocated for those purposes. Any deviation from that would require the explicit agreement of Homes England. But the focus around Homes England output is the homes, so it's connected to homes delivery in Purfleet.
Yep. Thank you. That's reassuring to hear. You've got conditions attached to that investment, but you're also saying the development agreement will need to be probably changed. So can you give me examples of what sort of changes that we're looking to undertake?
Again, it's still subject to discussions with potential partners, but it could be anything in relation to phasing or numbers. Again, very early stage in the process. The deviations to deviations. It's more about changes to the development agreement will have to be fairly minor in their nature, because the development agreement is fairly well set. But it could be around phasing, it could be around sort of the mix, and that's probably more to do reflective of the market conditions. And I think that's one of the issues that's been in review of the scheme over the last couple of years, not post-COVID, and when the market is in material costs, has has caused many schemes, not just this one, to be reviewed in terms of mix. And that's where we would keep an open mind, but obviously those would be reported back as part of due diligence to members.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. For clarifying, can I just ask one more question? It's regarding the land. Now, the land originally was bought by the UDA, the Urban Development Association, whatever it was, many, many years ago, Thames Gateway. And that was bought and then given to the council. Those parcels of land now are, as the scheme is progressing through, will be sold to the developer as part of our agreement with it. There's a significant amount of undeveloped land, really, that should be going into that scheme along the riverfront. What are we going to do with that, and how is that still there for the Purfleet development, or is that now going to be taken into the whole improvement and plan and recovery plan, where they might take that land and sell it?
Just looking at that unpackaging that question, in terms of actually the development agreement is in part sort of informed by a planning application, an outline planning application, which set out the parcels of land and how they would be used in terms of actually, and then I think the first phase 1A, which is the 34 units which are actually currently on site for, was the only scheme that's gone to reserve matters, so that's the detail of the planning. The rest of it's been set out in the outline consent, and the section 106 is attached to that. So that sets out the principles of where the land's going and how it will be used. And at the moment, that's the only document that's setting out that. So it's what was set out in the planning application will be delivered as it stands.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm just so concerned that if we're going to go through this whole thing with the commissioners, where they're going to look at every single piece of asset belonging to the council, including our housing stock, that this is at the moment, though it might be tied up in a development agreement somewhere, that it could be untied very quickly and sold, and that will be jeopardising this scheme, and this scheme is the biggest going, as far as I'm aware, in Thurrock right now, to deliver about 3,000 homes.
Chair, I would draw your attention to the, and this is to the executive summary, the final paragraph, where we actually do say that all capital schemes, including the Purfleet scheme, would be subject to that review, and that's only it's because we've been asked to review all the schemes. It doesn't mean anything's going to happen. It's just we're reviewing it in terms of actually what the implications financially for the council are of this scheme. Both as a debt management, but also as potential income generation in the future. So it's about balancing that out. So that's why it's subject to review. By the nature of reviews, we haven't had an outcome, so I can't comment on that as such.
Councillor Raper.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Can I just ask, you've mentioned twice about the 34 units of affordable housing. Can you expand on that and tell us it's 34 units out of how many?
Sorry, just getting the number up. Yeah, phase 1A is 34 units out of a total expected output of 2,650.
Of what? Oh, sorry. Could you repeat that? 2,000? 2,650
is the amount that's in the planning document.
And out of that total, how many further affordable housing units are expected?
I think the blended rate across the whole of the planning permission is 10%. That was the rate that was agreed at that when planning was approved in 2019. But Chair, I can come back and double check that, because I believe it's 10% across the scheme.
Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. My question, Kevin, is more on the background of PCRL which is Purfleet Centre Regeneration Limited. Could you tell us how the PCRL was made up? You indicated earlier that Swan Housing was a large part of that. Is that right?
So is the private sector entity that's taken forward the scheme is made up of shareholders that form PCRL. The details are actually on the council website, and so I'd have to go back through that detail and bring it back to you. But it's Urban Catalyst, Swan Housing, Kelbray as well, I think. But again, that detail I'd have to come back to you on.
Right, and you indicated, I think earlier, if my ears heard right, that 70% of that was Swan. So they're a large part of that made-up entity as such.
No, again, 70% is not a figure that I recognise in terms of actually it's not something that again, we can bring that information if it's freely available back to the committee.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Watson, I think you touched on the Thames Gateway Development Corporation. Were they the original ones that acquired this site? Because we do know that they were a Quango as such.
Again, Chair, that's information which is not in front of me at the moment, so I'd have to come back with details of any land acquisitions and by the Gateway, the corporation, and how that happened.
And can you just lastly for me, Kevin, the affordable part of it, you said that it would be 10%. Can you just define what is affordable and what them rates would be set at?
Again, Chair, that level of detail is not in front of me, but I can go back through the original consent and provide that information for the committee.
In previous committee meetings, what we've had with other senior officers in past years, over the devised local plan over the next 2 decades, we were looking at 32,000 further homes. Now, it was indicated before that 35% of those would either be social or affordable. 35% of the 32,000. Does that still stand? I mean, you're indicating that there's 10% affordable on this project, but it's nowhere near 35% over the 32,000 over the next 2 decades.
Again, I can't comment without going back through the detail of the planning application that was in 2019 when this was granted. It would have been subject to viability assessments at that point to actually to support the number. The 35% figure is a council policy position that you would seek on all sites, subject to viability assessments. So that's the theoretical sort of approach. How that plays out is subject to every site is determined on its own merits.
It'll be very interesting to find out what is truly deemed as affordable. I'd like that perhaps to come back at a further meeting, what council deem as affordable. Because we've looked at rents before and they've been deemed affordable as being deemed as 80% of the market rate. Now, I wonder if the same thing stands for the affordability if you was to buy these properties. Would they be deemed as 80% of the market rate? So perhaps if we could bring that back at a further meeting, that would be rather helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Carter.
Hi there. With this report, it seems that but the hope is that if you put the word positive in front of stuff, it becomes positive. But I have, for instance, I'd like to know why the IMC is being presented as a positive milestone when it hasn't actually gone past the discussion phase yet.
positive in the sense it's actually part of the network of IMCs that the council is promoting across the borough, and it's a requirement for that to be delivered as part of the first phase. So discussions are taking place in a positive manner with the NHS and for them to move forward on terms of the ultimate design of that. So those discussions are taking place in that sort of light. We are working positively to actually get that confirmed and how that's going to be brought forward.
What were the most recent discussions to have taken place?
Well, I spoke to the head of the NHS property yesterday. She informed me that work had been progressing in terms of actually the ultimate sort of concept design work was being promoted. So that's straight from the head of the NHS property yesterday in terms of the update, because we were discussing wider issues around Tilbury.
So that was in relation to Tilbury, not...
No, the discussion was initially about Tilbury, but there was an update on Purfleet as well. And there was a positive feedback that the design work was progressing.
Okay. I also understand Swan Housing is no longer the housing provider. Can you tell me why this was omitted from the report?
Well, Swan Housing are the housing provider, subject to, but we understand that they're subject to. Well, I understand it. They are part of the entity, but they've actually indicated, and it's in the public domain, that they're actually looking to merge with Sanctuary. I think by the end of this month. So that has to play out in terms of actually any notifiable changes to the council.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment on the IMC subject. Again, similar to Councillor Carter, it really doesn't strike me as being in a very positive place. I mean, it was only at this month's Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee that the NHS said, and I quote, Tiffany Hemming said, and I quote, after being asked by the chair about the state of the remaining 3 IMCs, that it was not looking great in terms of having enough money to pay for all the sites. I mean, that doesn't sound very positive to me. But I'll go to Councillor Gledhill because he had his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. And before I go on to my many questions, on the Swan Housing issue, I mean, we can't forget that a year or so ago that there was a financial warning issued in relation to the way that they dealt with some of their investments and so on. Sounds familiar. The government pulled the licence as being a social housing, hence they're going into conversations with Sanctuary to become a new entity to be able to carry that forward, which is really quite, it's going to cause a delay to this, even if it's only to the end of the month. But as Councillor Carter put, it is omitted from the report, and I think it's one of those really key factors that we can't just talk about the positives in a report, full stop. We're not here to talk about all the positives. We're here to talk about the whole issues, good and bad. Else it wouldn't be scrutiny. We'd just be the flag-waving committee in charge of making everything sound wonderful. So I think sort of problems and hiccups or hurdles, whatever you want to call them, I think really do need to be in these reports and need to be clear. And I'll come on to this in a later report. People out there are obviously, certainly in Purfleet, they're all sitting there reading the 3 pages of this or six sides of this, whatever you want to call it, and thinking, wow, I think I've seen this somewhere before. And probably going back to reports pre-2015 when the original contract was signed in relation to this with PCRL, and saying it seems to be same old, but no one's mentioned L&Q dropping out of it. No one's mentioned Swan having auditable issues that were flagged up by government and now being merged in with, or trying to merge in with another social provider. These are all really quite key, important factors, rather than just we've spent 25 million quid. So I sort of needed to sort of get that one off, rather than it being a question. And I don't want to do the officer's job for them, but on the Affordable Housing, Councillor Allen, it's the general national level of affordability. I'm going to look at Lee on this one because I know he's our planning expert. So when it comes to affordable housing, we tend to use the national definition of affordable housing, whatever that is at the moment. I can't remember. I think you're right, actually. I think it is 80% of the market value.
It's 80% of market value.
Putting you on the spot, Lee.
Thank you, Chair. So Kevin was right in terms of the affordable housing provision. That was tested through viability at the stage of the planning application. So Kevin's absolutely right. Every application will be different through the local plan. There will be an expectation of 35% for affordable, and Councillor Gledhill was right on the assumptions there. Chair, I'm fairly sure a report was presented to ONS fairly recently around affordable housing and products, and I think that may be something that we can speak to the committee clerk about recirculating for members information. If that doesn't answer the question, then of course the report could be brought back to answer some of those questions if there was an interest to pursue that line of inquiry further.
Yeah, very happy for that to be recirculated, and if not, then officers can provide written updates to members of the committee, but I'll go back to Councillor Gledhill.
Thank you, Chair. Oddly enough, my very last question was going to be when can we expect the answers to the many questions that are not, not got a full answer yet. That's not a slight on officers. Certainly Kevin's only been in position for a relatively short period of time, considering that this was signed in 2015 and it's been dragging on. And I use the term dragging on quite literally since. So I'm now going to go to some of the questions and statements that I've prepared on this one. So in the executive summary, it says that Thurrock Council succeeded in securing £75.1 million of grant funding from the Ministry of Housing. Obviously, that would be the HIF funding. Now, my understanding is that the HIF funding application was actually done by PCRL with a supporting notification from Council, rather than the Council doing with it and being supported by PCRL. So can we clarify whether the Council did it or whether it was PCRL's application? Again, if you can't answer that today, I can fully understand that. So don't feel that you have to sort of instantly respond.
We'll clarify that point.
So you've already covered the next one, which is some of the conditions of the grant might need to be changed. You're already in discussions with that as part of the DA change. When we look through the report, and obviously being a little bit more aware of the whole plan, Chair, there's this reference here to the Media Village, which was the TV and film studios, which I know certainly under the outline, on the original plans, was going to take up quite a sizable area of what's back of Botany Way, I think, at the moment. Thank you. I haven't lived in Perfect for so long, I have to make sure that I've got the right names. So, can we get an explanation as to why London Borough of Barking and Dagenham and the Mayor of London's office have managed to secure the funding, plan, agree to planning, build and open the film studios in the same time that we're still talking about them? Please. That may be a question that PCRL needs to be here to answer.
Again, Chair, we are aware of the film studios in Dagenham, but I think there are different it's a different location and different setup. I think here it's clear from the planning application that is an ambition to have a mixed-use scheme with a cultural edge to it, and that's in the current scheme, and that's something which we're looking to deliver in conjunction with PCRL. Obviously, conditions change, times changed, and supply change as well, and that's one of the issues that we'll be looking to potentially review as part of the any further discussions with PCRL or whatever entity emerges.
Thank you. So if we've got, as we know, everything has changed in the past 2 years. We can't escape that. But if there is such significant change, i.e., new film studios not 10 kilometres down the road, is there a plan B, do we know, for that site if it doesn't look like it's going to be commercially viable or more likely to actually attract people? Because I know with the film industry there's this very odd, if you're one side of the M25 you get a lower amount than you go on the other side of the M25. So for the industry being inside the M25, doesn't matter if it's 2 metres or sort of 20 kilometres, if you're inside the M25 you get paid the same. So it's whether or not they would actually want to come out here for the same price as going to Barking and Dagenham and being able to deliver it a lot sharper.
Again, that's a review question in terms of actually the development agreement at this stage is when every phase comes forward, it's tested for viability to the point is that we don't bring forward schemes which are not viable. I mean, that's the reality of it. So the mechanism working through PCRL is that these schemes would be reviewed to make sure that they were viable both within the marketplace and also met the wider aspirations of the council to create sort of the cultural offer. And remember, the cultural offer was to tie in with what's currently in location at High House and to build upon that sort of that concentration. I'm not a film expert, but discussions that we've had internally is that the nature of filming is changing in terms of actually the large backlots that were proposed as part of Phase 3 may not be required because we're moving to a more digitised sort of setup with smaller setups. But then you're still with Phase 3 where that site is off the back of Botany Road, you're actually on the old chalk face. So there's a limited opportunity for alternative uses for employment and notwithstanding that we want to move away from some of the heavy industries which are down there because they're not conducive to that place making, we would need to sort of work with our partners to review that as and when. But we're not static. We are conscious that the market's changing and sectors change in terms of actually locational requirements and space requirements, and we can build those into those discussions. But we can't second guess necessarily what's going to happen in 5 years' time. It is changing at a pace.
Thank you, and I'm glad to hear that we are looking at moving heavy industry. As we know, I will always bang on about the heavy industry that's based in Towers Road and how the fact that Little Thurrock Rectory has outgrown Towers Road and Towers Road has outgrown Little Thurrock Rectory. So the thought of moving this type of heavy industry out of places that are built up is absolutely great, but equally it does need to go somewhere. So, but it's good, it was really good to sort of hear that positive message. I am still concerned though, and this does touch on with what Councillor Watson said about obviously the ongoing review, is if we're unsure as to what's going to happen in 5 years, will this have an effect to say, well, actually, we need to be doing something now as part of the financial review. So we may need to look to claw back that land because it may or may not be delivered, or it may not be the right thing for Thurrock going forward. Getting something from the Development Corporation, however many years ago that died, 2010 or 2011. We're sort of 11 years on, things have changed, and in 5 years' time it might change again. So I'm just a bit concerned that we've got an outline plan, but that's already been superseded elsewhere. So I'm going to go on to 2.4 in the report. So it does seem to me that we're celebrating the spend of £25 million worth of £75 million worth of HIF funding, but we haven't fully, I say we, the project hasn't fully delivered 36, sorry, I can say 64 now. 34, sorry, thank you. 34 homes. You said that some of that's been used for land purchase, which I'm sure is covered by the HIF funding. I can't quite remember what was in and what was out. But 25 million spent, and I don't see any different infrastructure that's in place in Purfleet. I don't see any. I see some half-built homes, which is great. Seeing that I looked at an empty site for a number of years, that's all I'm going to say. But it does seem an awful lot of money spent. It's a quarter of the money that's been granted to us, and we've not actually delivered a home. And at 34 homes, that works out at 700 and something odd thousand per home on infrastructure spend so far. So what physically has been delivered, and if it's too long to list or you're not entirely sure, I'm more than happy to have that sent to us as an update.
Again, Chair, I can give a breakdown of the spend, the HIF spend to date, what's been spent on. So I think in terms of actually the point, it is about enabling development. You need to spend the money to actually acquire the sites, so therefore you can put the sites together to deliver the homes. So it's a bit unfair to equate that it's £25 million spend and 34 homes. I think that you've got to see it as part of a process. And that money enables the schemes to be brought forward, and certainly phases 1 and 2. That creates the quantum to deliver the large numbers, and more importantly, the social infrastructure that supports those in terms of the town centre, the school, and the medical centre as well.
I fully appreciate what's been said there, Chair, but it is really a case of, we bought a whole block of cottages and knocked them down, rightly so. And it needed to happen for a number of reasons. And if that's part of this, absolutely great. But if that land's not going to be built on for 5 or 10 or 15 years or whatever it is, then we do need to sort of put that in perspective. Spending £25 million now actually isn't a bad thing if we're not going to build onto it for 10 years, because doing that in 10 years is probably going to cost us 50 or 100 million. So this is not about slamming it being a negative. It's about actually saying what we've done, or what has been done, where the money's been spent. And then where we've got the possible changes to the development agreement, which you covered mostly with the answer to Councillor Watson. How's that going to be monitored before it's agreed? Will that come in front of this committee, or will it go straight to Cabinet, or will it be done in the background?
Chair, I need to double check that, but it's depending on how substantial the changes are in terms of the development agreement. But I can bring clarification on that back.
Thank you. That really would be very useful. And I know I've touched it a couple of times, so have other members. With the review that's going on. We're looking at somewhere between 70 and £75 million worth of land. Does that sound about a number that everyone recognises? That's been sort of held up in trust, for want of a better term, for this. I've just got concerns that if this is not going to be delivered, that's quite a quick win for the inspection to say, actually, you need to start putting that land over to another use. And that may well be the other use, which I think is going to be... it is. Excluding the fact it's Riverside and Prime Land, which, quite frankly, we've never made a good deal on in Thurrock when it comes to planning and actually putting in houses where everyone else has put in houses and charged £1 million for them. Excuse me. I'm more concerned that it'll end up going to storage sheds, or, for want of a better term, warehouses, because it's in the right area. It's next to the old A13. It's it's prime. It's begging for business development, which I think will be a bit of a death knell. Bearing in mind, as a former Purfleet resident, former Garrison Estate resident, we were promised this kind of stuff when I lived there. All I'm going to say is that was more than 10 years ago. It may have been more than 3 decades ago. Just no one springs to my defence on that one. I should have said no. It could have only been 2. So I'm really, whilst obviously there's a lot of things to come back, I really, bearing in mind that I've had a number of meetings with PCRL, with the current leader in his role of cabinet member at the time, and on a number of occasions we've suggested that it's time to call time on this unless they start delivering. And I mean actually delivering. Not 34 houses, actually delivering IMCs, town centres, film studios, TV studio. I'll be honest with you, some of the TV studio stuff was phenomenally fantastic when you look at it. how feasible it is another matter. You know, the oyster bar on the river, which apparently is a must. We must have an oyster bar. I have no idea why. Again, none of that appears to be sort of in the report, and I think that, bearing in mind 2015, the original signature on this, 2017, the planning permission starts to get granted, and it's now 2022. Even if you take out the bit where we couldn't build, which was actually very small in COVID, it doesn't really appear to be moving at anything that I would call a pace. And indeed, I'm really concerned about the recommendation 1.1, that we're effectively celebrating spending 25 million to 75 million pound, but we can come to that in discussion, Chair. There was one that's oh no, sorry, yeah, that was actually Councillor Watson who did that. We should have taken that off. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I think what Councillor Gledhill's really touched on is the key word: delivery. You know, we need to see implementation of this. It's been going on. I mean, I was involved in it when I was first elected for Tilbury St Chad's back in 2016. So it seems to be going on for quite some time. It's indicated on 2.4 that a core part of this is the IMC. And I've said this before and I will say it again, without health and well-being, we've got very little to hold on to. Now, this is a very important part of this project. My question would be, is it down solely to the NHS to implement this IMC, or the other one in Coronham was slightly renamed, rebranded, the Integrated Medical and Wellbeing Centre, which was the IMWC. Can you recall it? Just a couple of weeks ago. Is it a fact that the NHS, with regards to all these IMCs, are stalling or dragging their feet for implementation? Because I believe we should see this perhaps implemented first before we see the homes even. Yeah. You know, and it getting used before these homes are even implemented. Now, what are we doing to ensure that the NHS are going to, you know, provide this in good time? Are we pushing the NHS to provide this IMC here?
Again, I'll clarify that the point of delivery, but my understanding from the understanding of the documentation is that PCRL deliver the building and hand it over to the NHS for fit-out purposes, and that's point of the discussion that's taking place at the moment between PCRL and the NHS is about confirming that sort of that specification, and it's the same discussion that's taken place in terms of Tilbury. Over the period in terms of actually what's going to go in, so they can actually produce the outline business case, which was actually, which my understanding was submitted for both Purfleet and for Tilbury. So progress is being made in terms of actually getting to the point where they actually know what they want in the buildings, and they know what is likely to be the internal costings.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just come back on that, Kevin. With regards, firstly, to the Purfleet one, again, it's. I think we're going to see this implemented, the IMC, after the delivery of the 2,650 homes. That's what I fear, but I fear that it should really come perhaps before. And touching back on Tilbury, which is, you know, got a. It's a place that I was born and bred and schooled and work and so on. We've seen the former fire station demolished. That's been demolished now for some time. So what we see, you know, it's just fenced off, a derelict piece of land at the moment, and not a single brick has been laid or a foundation has been put in. Again, it's when will these integrated medical centres be implemented? Now, we have been promised by NHS that they will be implemented before they cease services at Allsip. So, I mean, does that promise still stand from NHS that they will be implemented before the services finish in Allset? But I'm feeling rather, I don't know, a little bit downtrodden on these, because I believe that, you know, they're not going to be implemented in time to you know, cater for people's health in the borough. And our population's rising, Kevin, so...
So, Chair, just on that point, I mean, I am slipping outside of my area, but my understanding is that principle of the IMCs will be operational before offset closures. It was actually reported back to the Wellbeing Board on a number of occasions. In relation to the delivery in relation to Purfleet, and I'd have to double check with, and I'll come back to the committee on this, but within the development agreement there are triggers, and triggers within the planning consent related primarily to the school. That I think it's after 300 homes occupied, then the trigger is you have got to provide the school. So I think in the development agreement there are phasing that the IMC has to be delivered in phases 1 and 2. So therefore, unless it's delivered there, then the trigger for the future phases 3 to 8 don't happen. So there is some reassurance around the trigger mechanism, but I do accept that this has not been, in terms of actually, it's not lived up to expectations in terms of delivery, notwithstanding sort of issues around COVID. It's not delivered as much as the council would have anticipated, and that's something we need to look at as well with our partners. In terms of actually, in terms of the review, just to picking up on this point, is that the review is still, the development agreement is still in place, and it's still subject to our relationship with to deliver the land acquisition. So unless and until that development agreement falls away or whatever, we're still committed to delivery of that scheme. So any review would need to take into consideration our legal requirements or constraints within that. So.
Councillor Raper.
Thank you. If I could just follow on from something Councillor Allen has said, and perhaps go back to one of my questions. You spoke about the 34 affordable housing units. Has any social housing been created yet? Or should there be any?
The affordable homes do form part of that sort of that affordable, offer. I mean, in terms of actually, you're making a distinction between
social housing and affordable, yeah.
Again, I'd have to come back with details on that. My understanding is that they are affordable. The precise detail of that, I'll have to come back.
Okay, thank you. And just really reiterating something Councillor Gledhill said is there were quite a few bits and pieces today that you obviously haven't got the data on hand. Can we make sure they're all sent to us in advance of the next meeting? Thank you.
Councillor Gledhill.
Sorry, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Watson, did you? Yeah. So I'll give way to Councillor Watson before I do my bit.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Gledhill. There's quite a bit here missing out of this report, and there's quite a bit that I know that's going on behind the scenes on a lot of this. So I know that, like, the last 2 years, they are doing the design. They've gone out to the communities, there's forums, and there's everything else that's been happening, and it does look a really good scheme. The bit that's probably missing is the phasing, because the IMC comes at a later phase, not at the beginning of the phase. So I already know that they're now looking at the marketplace and how they're going to redo Purfleet Station, which is phenomenal, really. It would be really good to have in place then what the phasings are and how that works. It would also be really good to see the development agreement phases, what kicks in where as part of the planning application to come back. And as for the affordability, there is no social homes, they're affordable homes. So the affordable split will be 70% rent or shared ownership, but that hasn't been really decided, and that would be good to actually know. I would absolutely love social housing down there, because it is a completely different breed. It's about 37% of market rent.
Yeah.
But affordable housing, you can still get 50% affordable housing. That still goes under the London Housing Allowance. That is affordable for Thurrock people. That I will keep going on about in affordability. So I thought we had a policy for 35% affordables. This is only 10. I thought that was the standard. But maybe I'm wrong. If you could bring back and clarify that, that would be really good as well.
Yes, Chair. Okay? What we'll do is that we'll bring back. We can circulate the phasing plan that was with send out with the planning application, and maybe we'll extract the detail of the planning application as well, where it relates to housing, so members can be updated on what was decided back in. I could say it was 2019, and we were in a different place then. So, but we can get that extracted and sent out as a package.
Thank you.
Can I just also add that if anything happens to this scheme and it doesn't go through quick enough, my residents in Purfleet-on-Thames will be absolutely devastated. So this isn't just about us sitting around the table. I'm now thinking about all my residents that are looking forward to this scheme, because there's an IMC coming through on it that they're looking for. There's a marketplace because they haven't got shops down there. And there's also a primary school, which is the one that says oversubscribed anyway. So can we just bear that in mind when we're trying to accelerate delivery, please? Thank you.
Councillor Gledhill.
It's good to know that Councillor Watson and I are on exactly the same page on this, because I actually wrote down it's not actually what the expectation of the council being, it's been under-delivered to what we expect. It's actually to what the residents expect. I've sat in, I don't know how many meetings of CELEP and other bodies saying that the process we use for the Perfect Regeneration programme is the right one. It's consultation, 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 and if you speak to the people in Purfleet and say, what's coming from this? It's, we're getting a new medical centre, we're getting a new road, we're getting a bridge, we're getting the marketplace, we're getting jobs, we're getting... And then right at the end, they mention, there's a couple of thousand homes. Whereas any other application you go to anywhere else in the country, they're going to put 3,000 homes on this site, because it's all about the homes. This has been flipped on its top in the right way, and it actually does say here, which kind of touches on what Councillor Allen was driving at, that it's going to be delivered as an infrastructure first approach. And whilst I know that is phased, so there will always be a little bit of housing before you put a school in, a little bit of something before you put the marketplace in. The infrastructure should be going in. My concern is that residents have been told time and time and time and time and time again, and again I'm going back to when I was in my late teens, early 20s and lived in the area, that all this type of thing would happen. I'm now in my mid-50s and people in Purfleet are still waiting. What I don't want is people who are in their late teens, early 20s now in Purfleet, sitting in this seat in their mid-50s, moaning about the fact it still hasn't been delivered. And my real big concern is that it's not working at any kind of pace that any of us expect, not just in this room, but the residents of Purfleet and Thames. And it's those people that is being let down by this not being delivered at the pace at which we all expect, and that's the greater Thurrock expects. And I think it really is, we need to look to say, what under this development agreement, is there the ability to pull this and then start to look at another provider who will actually deliver this in line with what we expect? And I use the royal we for Purfleet-on-Thames residents, everyone in this table, everyone in this room, and get that done.
I'll have one last comment from Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick comment. It's pretty disappointing not having a social housing part attached to this. And what I think Council should be looking at, seriously should be looking at, and it's been discussed in previous meetings, is income strips and build-to-lease development. Now, build-to-lease developments can certainly accommodate social housing, It's very little cost to the council. Well, the council would probably incur no costs at all, but would have to obviously sign a leased agreement for probably a fixed term of 40 to 50 years. But after that term is completed, the lease term, I understand that the units are handed over to council for a peppercorn amount and then become council housing. So I can't see why we're not looking at build to lease development, which could open up for social housing.
Do you want to come back on that, Kevin? Or?
I think Councillor makes some interesting points. I think these are points which we can take back to our housing colleagues as part of a wider discussion in terms of actually housing provision.
Apologies. I'd let Kevin respond to most of the questions. I just thought it might be helpful if we're wrapping up this particular one, and it also might help with saving a bit of time on the next agenda item. If I just respond on a couple of points. Firstly, both Kevin and I agree that the report before you is not good enough in terms of the detail or the content, and moving forwards we will ensure there is more detail there. I'm also a believer that we should be producing a almost sort of resume reminder as part of our reports going forwards, so that some of the history that we forget, we might remember some of the detail but not all of it, is there to remind us when the planning permission was granted, what it granted and the likes, so that that's there, so that we're not sort of trying to rack our collective brains to remember what's there. So part of the reason that Kevin's post has been created, my original post and now my new post, is to really start to look at how we work more collaboratively across property, planning, regeneration, to make sure that we get delivery, and perhaps be less reliant on assuming that our partners will do things rather than actually pushing and encouraging them to. In terms of the asset approach, just to give some reassurance, yes, part of my role is to provide the inspectors, commissioners, with a full list of all assets that are owned by the council, so that they can understand what the potential might be for solving some of our capital issues with asset sales. But I would remind you that part of the direction is to ensure that we have a sustainable council going forwards, and part of that will be ensuring that our council tax base, business rates base grows, so that we have the money to go forward. So we won't be simply looking at a fire sale, and I've discussed this with the commissioners. We will be looking at each of those assets to look at what is the best overall outcome from those, rather than just simply which is the quickest way to get some cash in. Don't get me wrong, we will need to sell a lot of assets and get some cash in, but there will be other assets where it makes sense to hold on to them and to progress development. And to pick up on your point, Councillor Cahill, and I think others have alluded to it, in discussing with PCRL the proposal that they are putting forward with a new funding partner, and whether that involves any amendment to the development agreement, we will certainly be looking at what our other options are, including whether we can move away from the current agreement and deliver it differently. So all of that will be looked at. We may or may not be able to do that, but certainly going forwards, we are looking to build a team that will be more proactive in making things happen rather than assuming that things will happen. And just a final point, as somebody who in my last authority was involved in delivering 3 film and TV studio projects within the M25, and working with our neighbouring authority on one literally the other side at Waltham Cross, I think there is still capacity in that market. Most of it's TV streaming rather than film at the moment, and that's continuing apace post-COVID. Obviously, most of us were watching a lot more of that during COVID, but that's continued. But I think certainly the Mayor's Film Office was quite instrumental in if you like, collating that and working on where clusters might happen. And I think going forwards, I would expect that we should be working with the Mayor's Film Office to understand what the pipeline is, what the capacity is, and whether film and TV is a viable option going forwards, or whether we should rethink and look at what other high-value job opportunities there are in that area. So, what I'm saying is we've inherited some stuff. We now need to review it, take it forwards, and when we come and report, be much more clear about what has happened, what hasn't happened and why, and what we're going to do about it.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Gledhill.
I couldn't be happier with that answer. Chair, thank you very much, Mark.
A very, very quick one from Councillor Allen.
Question for you. Thank you, Chair. Question for you, Mark. Do you agree, as a senior officer, that we should be looking at all social housing aspects on all developments? Because if we're going to deliver on the 35%, as we've previously estimated, on the 32,000 further homes that will be introduced to Thurrock, should we not be looking at every one of those developments with a certain percentage of that social housing, solving and reducing the current waiting lists?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have a policy target, and then we have the planning process, and at a planning application stage, viability does have to play a part in that, because there's no point in granting consent for something that won't happen. But I agree with you that development takes place, particularly on large schemes, over a period of time, and just because you agree a mix at one stage in that process doesn't mean you shouldn't continually review that mix as the market develops, as the development develops, and as viability changes, because we all know that early stages of regeneration projects are more challenging, and once you've created value, you may have more scope to recast the mix, if you like. So certainly going forwards, we should make sure that our development agreements do have the flexibility for us to challenge that throughout the process. But I agree with you that the housing crisis, if you want to call it that, and that's what the media keeps calling it, for perhaps good reason, will not be solved by one single type of property. It will be solved by creating a range of property through the rental and shared ownership and market sale market, and perhaps some policies are focused on one or two bits at different times, and I don't want to go into politics, but we need to be looking at how do we ensure that the whole mix is provided. But we also have to make sure that we don't lose track of viability.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mark. I'm really interested in all of this. And social housing for me is like, I'd love loads of social housing. I'd also like the idea of affordable housing under the local housing allowance rate, which is slightly different, but it's for those that's on benefit as well. Could we have a report back and a discussion at a later regeneration, do you think, Chair, on all of this sort of thing, to talk about the place shaping on housing in the future? And businesses?
I think it should be a whole borough-wide thing, not just...
Yeah, no, it's all borough-wide, not just Purpley.
Yeah,
I'm talking about a whole borough-wide one.
We've got the work programme coming up at the end. We can add it to the work programme. It's not a problem. It's not a
I just
problem.
think it would be, and also to have a look what's in the plan borough-wide, or what's affordable in the developments that are coming through as well, and what are private.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Not a problem.
Thank you.
We're going to finish up there. That was quite a good conversation. I'm not going to labour the point because it's been made by a number of members already, but I'm pleased to hear you acknowledge, Mark, that the 2 regeneration reports tonight are inadequate. They are. I expect more than 3 pages for issues such as these, but we can use this as a learning experience, and going forward I'm sure they won't be 3 pages long. Just on the recommendations, as pointed out by Councillor Gledhill, 1.1 does ask us to comment on the positive progress of the scheme so far. I don't see any positive progress so far, so I won't be agreeing to that recommendation. I would look to take out the word positive, but I will open the floor up for any further comment or discussion on the recommendations. Otherwise, we will move to them, but with positive removed from 1.1. Councillor Gledhill.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Not only have I got a problem with the word positive in that aspect, it's not what overview scrutiny is here for, to look at one aspect of it. It's to look at positives and negatives. And also where it's got the continued success of the 7.15 million HIF and central government investment into the borough, of which 25 million has been claimed for Purfleet, is a bit misleading. It kind of, I can see where Councillor Watson was coming from with her first question, which is this all for Purfleet or is this right for elsewhere? It kind of gives the impression that 25 million has gone into Purfleet, and actually the 75.1 million should go into Purfleet. So I don't really see how that adds anything to the recommendation at all, beyond that we've asked to comment on the progress of the scheme, which we've done, and I think also to take on board Mark's statement about when we go forward on the DA is to look at is a change to the DA the only thing we need to do, or are there other aspects? So I think that more about the DA in that recommendation rather than just the HIF funding. It's great getting money from government. It's great that money being spent as long as it's delivering something. But personally, irrespective of whether it's locally or nationally, I don't think the spending of money should be a measure of success. Spending of money is one of those things that happen. It's whether you get the outcomes from it, which at the moment, and it's quite right, we are early in the scheme, I don't think that's going to happen. So I would shorten this to ask to comment on the progress of the scheme and note as we go forward with the development agreement and the second part of the HIF funding, and look forward to a further update in relation to those aspects of it. And then that 1.2 is then really, really important, and that gets more in depth into what Mark was saying, which I'll agree with 1.2 as written.
Are we all agreed?
Absolutely agree on the amendments, yeah.
Fantastic. We will move on to the next item, which is the Grays Regeneration update found on page 15, and I shall go back to Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a report that hasn't been back to committee for a while. Again, noted the points that made in the previous committee about the level of detail. It's a quite striking that balance between an update report with the level of detail and keeping them brief as well. This is a report essentially in three parts in terms of the update. I draw members' attention to section 3 and just go through that. The first one is the Grays Town Centre strategy. Also working as a working title, the Grays vision, in terms of actually, and this is about updating the work that was done in relation to the framework of 2017, or that went to cabinet. It's an opportune time to do that in terms of actually working with colleagues within the new place directorate, in terms of highway colleagues and planning colleagues and economic development colleagues. We're at a very early stage in the local plan review, and lots of things have happened in terms of since 2017, notwithstanding the COVID, but also changes in terms of actually retailing and changes in terms of actually housing need and growth, and it's about understanding the role Grays can play in that. And again, I make no bones about saying a positive role in terms of actually there's an opportunity now to actually work with the different disciplines in the place directorate to actually look at the options for Grays as for its vision for the next 20-30 years, and that's a positive in terms of actually working not just with the council staff, but also stakeholders in the town, whether that be New River or large landowners such as ASDA and others. And it's about understanding what are the challenges that we face, which are self-evident if you walk the high street, but also more about the opportunities that the location offers. There's understanding what the strategy should be and how we can actually adapt that, but also make it realistic. So we'll work up through that process of actually saying where the strengths and where the weaknesses are, what are the opportunities and how that can phase. And that will be important in determining what the local plan strategy will be, what the economic development strategy in the future will be, what the role of the council in terms of regeneration, which will be changed from current circumstances to become more of an enabler than a deliverer, and that's self-evident. So that's the piece of work that's going on at the moment. We've got an internal Grays board set up, which is being used to promote that work, and that's the Chair. I don't know if you want to take questions on each of the sections, or do you want me just to go through?
Have you finished your...
No, that's just on the Grey strategy. There's two other elements that.
Present on...
Okay.
Whatever you want, and then we'll ask questions.
Okay. The second point in there is there's the Greys. Well, it's called the Greys Investment Plan. It's basically the town fund scheme. Just to update members, there was £19.9 million allocated from the Levelling Up Fund, the Towns Fund, in terms of actually allocated for Greys. Those schemes were promoted by the Greys Town Board, which is made up of a mixture of private and public sector entities, and they focus around three main areas. One of those is actually it's a refurbishment. Well, no, it's a total sort of refurbishment and update of the park area and the beach. It's about creating that sort of sense of place and updating the area around the beach area. The second one is basically a community arts cafe around the existing cafe space, and that's about actually creating sort of an identity and a location in that area. And the final one is relates to an activity centre, which is close to the yacht club in terms of actually promoting an opportunity for activities related to predominantly the Sea Scouts and others. Those were the three key schemes that were submitted as part of the business case planning that went into the department just at the end of October. We are now awaiting news from the department about the confirmation of the spend, and we're anticipating that will come back to the council in the new year. To date, I've not heard anything, any negative comments at the moment, but it's still subject to that approval. The final element is actually one which has been probably more long-standing than the others, is the Greys Underpass. Again, the scheme has been in design gestation for a while. We are now at the point where we have a planning application that's been submitted. It is due for consideration early in the new year. Precise dates are to be determined, but that's my understanding. We have actually entered a design agreement with Network Rail, and that's been very positive in the sense of getting Network Rail involved in terms of actually the design process, and they are undertaking the detail or the preliminary design, the engineering design, which allows this thing to be brought forward. A paper's going up post the planning permission to Cabinet to seek or update the authorities for any future CPOs that are required to deliver the scheme. And against that, we are undertaking a gateway review of the scheme in terms of actually where we are with it and how we can ensure more effective delivery of the scheme in terms of actually where we've been and where we need to go. I think that's quite important, and that's taking place in conjunction with the detailed, well, the engineering design work, and we should be in a position by February, March to actually be able to report that back, both internally to senior officers and also to committee as well about the next stages.
Thank you for presenting the report, Kevin. Just briefly to begin with, you mentioned about striking a balance with reports being detailed but brief as well. Always err on the side of detail. We want as much detail as possible. Detail. Don't worry about being too brief. On the report itself, though, on page 18 it is, we've got a little table outlining the timeline. Construction of the underpass is July 2025. Now, a report came to this committee in July 21, I think it was, and in that report it said that the latest cost estimate is based on a programme that assumes a start on site in late 2022. We're now looking at July 2025. So my first question is, 2.5 years, what on earth has caused that 2.5 year delay? And the second question, again in the report from July 21, mentions any delay to this programme could increase the overall costs. How confident are you when it comes to the cost of this project and that report and where we are now? I'm just a little bit concerned at where we are in terms of possible cost.
Yeah, in terms of actually the July 21 Cabinet report, that set out a timetable at that time. What you find in front of you is what been updated to me by the project team as the realistic timelines, and they've been tested in part. I would want to review those, and that's my intention, to review those through the gateway with the gateway review we're actually going to do, to see if those can actually be sharpened. I think where we're looking at in terms of actually we've got a process where we've actually recruited many people internally on interim contracts to deliver that, and we need to test again whether that's the most effective way of delivering it, or there are other mechanisms where we can reduce our risk in relation to the scheme, but also increase the effectiveness of delivery, and that's part of that review. In terms of actually the costs, again, that's a fundamental question I posed as well in relation to what the budget allocation is reported back to Cabinet in 2021. And in terms of actually how that stacks up in terms of actually cost increases, so that will form part of that review.
So you're not in a position to tell us why we're sat here with a 2.5 year delay from the last time this came to committee?
Again, I'd have to check the detail of that and bring it back to you in terms of actually.
Pretty important details. If you could do that, that'd be appreciated. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, like as Mark said previously, the report is lacking so much detail. It's unbelievable. And if I remember rightly, when it comes to regeneration in 2021, it was half-baked report then, and it's even less now. In terms of like 3.6, once again, there's a capital programme of 37.3 million that was agreed at Cabinet in 2021. That doesn't look like it will. That's for land assembly, including CPO provision. That's not going to happen until July 2024. I'm feeling really less confident in that right now, because that is at the cost in 2021. Now we're looking at the costs in 2024. There is going to be additional costs, because there's also pressure costs going on top. The bit that I'm feeling as well very uncomfortable with is, once again, we're going through this whole recovery and improvement board. At least with Purfleet, we've got spades in the ground and we're doing something. We're not here. And I think we're more in a risk here to have this pulled and said we're not doing anything. And that's what I'm really worried about. So this should have all been, as Councillor Anderson said, it should have all been started 2021. Should have carried on going. And it's not now. So what is a contingency? What if the recovery and improvement plan says it can go ahead with 37.3 million? You must have costed this out on a forecast to 2024. What is the differential in the millions that you're going to require that you may not get?
So, Chair, that is the point of the Gateway Review. At the moment of writing this report, we're actually going through that process. I haven't got the information in front of me because that review hasn't taken place, so therefore I can't answer the question you're posing. But it's something which we're conscious of, not just on this report. I mean, this scheme, but all our capital delivery schemes are going through this review, and that's correct in terms of actually and reasonable project management of these things, that we would actually undertake these reviews.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Kevin, it's probably not your fault or anybody's fault, but I'm feeling so frustrated right now in the lack of details that we're going to get through. And we're supposed to be scrutinising, and we're not scrutinising anything because we're going through gateway reviews constantly. I just find it that we're sitting right now that I would really have liked projects on the way. So they're in the ground and we're committed to them. Here, this is just a bit of paper saying we're going to be committed to them. We're not committed to them because somebody could take that away. So I just think this needs to come back very, very soon. I don't even care if we have another extraordinary meeting. Just to start bottoming out exactly what these costs are, what we're looking at, because the programme keeps slipping. We've already got a 2-year slippage from 2021.
Okay.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're all singing from the same hymn sheet here, Kevin, with concerns of costs spiralling and delivery, the implementation of existing budget envelopes. We don't know a few years down the line the cost of materials. They could spiral, and it's not going to land within that existing budget envelope. We're probably not going to get as good a finished project as what we may have expected at the start, And again, I was involved in this, the Greys Underpass, in 2016 when I was first elected for Tilbury St Chad's. And I was under the Network Rail were supposed to be providing a certain amount towards. There was a contributed amount, I do believe, going towards the underpass because they absolutely want that crossing closed, for safety reasons. So they did initially say that they were going to give X amount. I can't remember what the amount was, but I do believe they then redacted that amount and reduced it to really by a lot, and they weren't going to contribute anywhere near as much as what they were initially going to do. I mean, can you elaborate on that? And again, the concerns of all these projects being bought within the budget envelope, and we get what we, initially expect and nothing less.
Just to pick up a number of those points, I do share the frustration of the committee in terms of the level of detail, and that will be rectified in terms of actually when we bring back a further report once we've undertaken the review to provide all the information in detail. So that's the first point. The second point, in terms of actually one of the reviews, is actually looking at the funding mix at the moment. And the funding mix, as reported, is the majority of the funding is coming from the local authority and with a grant from CELEC as well. not a substantial amount from others. So we will be looking again at that part of that as part of the funding mix as the review goes forward. And we've started those discussions with Network Rail. They're aware of the situation, but again, we need to get to a position where, as part of the review, we can actually have the data so we can go back to them.
Thank you, Chair. We would expect again a contingency, if we were to go over like we did. I mean, if we are to, for example, look at the A13 and Stamford-le-Hope station, they're far over the initial budget envelope, I do believe. So we could see this with these projects, going over the initial budget envelope. Have we got a contingency? Have we got another amount of money if we were to overspend, if it was to cost more money? Is there any something to fall back on, Kevin?
Again, there is a contingency built into the scheme at the moment already, and that's built into the 37 million, and that's inclusive of a land acquisition costs. There's elements in terms of actually which we haven't factored into that cost about income that could come back into the scheme from the sale of surplus land arising from the CPO. So that's a piece of work that needs to be done that can feed into that process. But in relation to any cost increase or overcost or this, that's really part of the review. And I would add, from my experience of dealing with the schemes out in Tilbury and some of the reviews of the grey schemes in the tip, is that that's a real challenge. And I think to a certain extent, what I'd like to do as part of that review is test all of these assumptions that have been made that sit with it behind the current numbers. I'm reporting to you what's in the scheme at the moment, but we'll interrogate those rigorously, and what we'll bring back to members is actually is a clear review, warts and all, in terms of actually the current proposals for delivery and options, other options that may be required.
Councillor Gledhill.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst Councillor Allen was getting elected in Tilbury St Chad's in 2016, I think Councillor Coxall and I were meeting with the then Secretary of State, saying thank you very much for £11 million cheque, walking through the High Street and explaining, what a fantastic scheme this would be. And then again, I think it was 2019, to the new Secretary of State at that point of what we were going to do, a lovely wooden diorama. And boy, did it look nice. And that was going to be on display, and this is what we were going to work to. And that's changed since. I'm really concerned that both Councillor Coxall, who's now here, viewing the meeting, plus myself, have gone to Celep. I've lost count how many times to say that, yes, we will be putting the plans forward, yes, this will be happening, that will be happening, with the £11 million originally granted, and I can't even remember which Secretary of State it was now. It was that far back. So the first question is that £11 million at risk from CELEP?
The CELEP money is conditional on delivery of outcomes, and those outcomes have to be delivered. Otherwise, ergo, the money could be subject to claw back. And just to reiterate, the outcomes that are tied to the CELEP money are the creation of the two public spaces either side of the underpass. That's what the funding is tied to.
That's correct, although not in the report. It's also there's a time aspect of this. As I say, Councillor Coxall, both now as leader and previously as just for the Regeneration portfolio holder, and myself at various CELEP meetings have said, yes, this will start, yes, plans will be submitted, and so on. I think in June this year, I gave, again, an assurance that it would be submitted by, I can't remember when the next accountability board is. So irrespective of it's £11 million for the two open spaces or whatever, is that at risk? Because we are now, yet again, another 2.5 years on a delay of 2.5 years on a delay of 2 years.
again, through the chair, CELEP are well aware of the timelines, and there is a CELEP board on Friday, I believe, and an update report sits within that agenda. We are in close conversation with them, so they understand where we are in terms of timelines. The question is whether the money is at risk. All grants are at risk if you don't achieve the outcomes. But I think we can only keep updated CELEP on where we are. And I think bringing it back to the review, and it's not a get-out in terms of actually saying, but it's actually looking at it and saying, well, whatever's happened, prior to August when I took over, it's a question of actually where we are now and actually saying, well, is this the best route forward? Because there's no point in having a programme which is non-deliverable. And I think that's part of the challenge I was brought in to do, is to look at schemes and say, well, does it make sense? And that's part of that review. I mean, the current sort of programme we've got, the current setup in terms of delivery, is it going to deliver it? Again, that's a challenge because currently there's been, looking back at it, there's been a history of failed milestones all the way through, and I think that is a challenge. And I think what I would like to bring back in future is a programme which has some credibility behind it, and we can actually say, so this is doable. That's all I can report back to the committee at this stage.
I've heard those words from your predecessors. I do get the feeling, however, you will actually be able to do it, which is because you used the term earlier, which is the council becoming an enabler rather than a deliverer, which I think is something that is long overdue here. So I was really pleased to hear that. Going on back to the report, it does seem to me we've got, and obviously we have got the great Towns investment plan that's going. And yes, that would mesh in with what our master plan was, and obviously will need to be re-looked at and how that is delivered. But I sort of do feel that we need to, and I think Kevin tried to do this at the beginning, was to compartmentalise the Towns Fund stuff and then what we're doing, and then like the underpass. But I sort of do think that whilst they're all intrinsically linked, I do think they should be kind of really marked as separate in like separate chunks. One of the things I did notice was missing is the jetty plans from the Towns Fund. Has that now been dropped, or is that on a second or third or fourth application to government?
In terms of actually the original Towns Fund application, I think there was probably a number of, there was about 6 projects, including a new pontoon jetty for future services. And I think some public realm work connecting the parks to the town centre. I think part of that initial review that we undertook in terms of some of the costings, and this is where I come back to, it's about looking at the schemes in a bit more detail and saying, well, and poking them and saying, well, does that actually make sense? And some of the costings that were submitted in the original tip, particularly around the jetty, I think were woefully underestimated. I think to the point where I think the original submission was something like 5 million, and the cost would be in excess of double that. So that was reported back to the town board, and the town board took a decision that they couldn't afford everything. So in terms of actually their priorities, the priorities were the activity centre, the public space, but more importantly, it's about that the creation of the new park, or the enhanced park. So that was the decision that was ratified by the Grays board, and that's what subsequently formed part of the business case submission to the department.
Thank you. It does kind of answer. It's obviously not there, and that's because there's something that Councillor Allen sort of touched on earlier, which was budget envelopes. Sometimes, irrespective of whether it be O13, the original budget envelope was 2010, 2008, I think. But by the time we actually started delivering it, we were sort of 10, 15 years on. That money hadn't been sort of factored into it, and I think again, if in the past plans have been put forward that are not realistic, kind of sort of falls into that. Are we actually putting something forward that's achievable at the right price, so it's not instantly reported as you've overspent. And actually, it's not you've overspent; it's you literally underestimated how much it was going to cost, which is a slight difference. The only other thing that I think is missing from the report, and well, there are many things that are missing from the report, is there is pretty much nothing on here about partnership working. So you did mention obviously New River, Morrison's, and obviously not Wetherspoons now. But I really do think that there needs to be aspects of this as how we're working with the private sector. It gets back to, again, what you're saying, being an enabler rather than a deliverer. The public sector is in a much better position to deliver what they need, and we should be able to work with them to ensure the bits that are ours are done. And I think that really needs to be a key part of this. I've seen the plans for New River. They are fantastic. I'm sure there are other places that will come forward with fantastic plans as well. And I think we need to be right early on showing a really joined-up approach between the council and the outside organisations that are doing that. That also helps us with getting money in from government. If we look at the last report, they are now having to go for the next stage of their funding is to be showing they're working with the private sector. We should be able to show this straight from day one in these reports. So I'd really expect to see that sort of foremost in the future, Chair. Other than that, Councillor Watson asked most of my questions.
Councillor Raper.
Thank you. Can I draw your attention to 2.3? The second sentence there says other schemes are progressing to improve the connectivity of the town centre with its riverfront. Could you expand on that, please? So, what are these things that are progressing and how are they progressing?
Again, Chair, I'm going to have to come back to it and clarify that point in terms of the precise initiatives that makes reference to.
Councillor Raper.
Well, I think that answers it. It's just reading it. It suggests that progress is being made, but I couldn't find in the rest of the document what that specifically was. So I would be grateful for that. Thank you.
Again, Chair, just to clarify, it could be initiatives outside of the regen portfolio, and it's just making reference that there are other initiatives been undertaken, but I'll clarify that in a note.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any further questions?
Just a comment.
Yeah, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment. It'd be nice to see actually Thurrock Council championing these projects, because it certainly feels like, we're dragging our heels, we're delaying things, instead of pushing for these and getting these done, getting these projects done. It just seems forever to come to fruition, and as time goes by, I'm sure costs will just spiral.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Just quickly, Mark, can we? I think you've got a flavour now of what we're trying to ask for in every single report that's coming through. More in detail, more things about costings, what it looks like, forecast. Can we please, going forward, have that sort of report going, so we're not left with reports that say there is been progress on something, but it doesn't tell us what? Because, I don't know whether officers know this, but we do actually read all our reports. So, because I personally, I think that because you've wrote them, it's respectful for me to read them. So, thank you.
That is, I'm delighted to hear that you do read them, and it's evident from your questions that you do, and we need to give you that information. So the ideal outcome is that you have all of the answers, and your questions are really getting into detail. You're asking questions that should be in this report, And my intention is that in future meetings, we second guess what you're going to ask us. And that's what we should be doing. Is if I was interrogating this project, what would I be asking? And therefore, the report should be seeking to answer that wherever possible.
Thank you for that. Councillor Gledhill.
Yeah, very quickly, Chair. I'm going to say this now because we're going to actually reverse what we've just said about detail. Obviously, detail is great. Sometimes too much detail confuses the situation, but that's more for the next item than this one. Bearing in mind, these are public meetings. Do we have a member of the public here this evening? There are probably thousands tuning into this as we speak, because there's nothing else happening in the world. I think they would look at this and go, so there's a 5-page report, and you've really sort of discussed what's not on there rather than what's actually happening. Although, obviously, Councillor Raper's really good question just now about what actually has been delivered. And I think that there needs to be an understanding of, just imagine we weren't here and it was 6 members of the public that were randomly taken off the internet rather than sitting and watching there and were here asking those questions, that those reports would be adequate for them to understand what's going on, and also be it for them to be quizzed afterwards with 10 quick questions. What's happening in Grays? What's happening with the underpass? What's happening with this? And I think there just needs to be that real understanding of what we require, not just second guessing, because trust me, if you second guess, Councillor Watson and I will sit here and triple guess you, because that's what we do. That's what scrutiny is about. But I just feel that there's, it's not just the lack of detail in this, and I do really feel for Kevin. Actually, he's not really been here sort of that long, and I'm talking about probably 5 or 6 secretaries of state ago that have attended here in relation to some of these, and what we can't have is and in 2015 this happened, 2015 this happened, because it ended up with too much detail. Just that general where we've been, where we are, just in case suddenly we all win the lottery, we don't turn up, but a whole new bunch of councillors are doing this, so they can actually deliver it. But other than that, Chair, it's it is as we say, but I don't think there's much more we can do on the recommendations other than what's here, other than look forward to the report coming in with a lot more detail. And I would back what Councillor Watson said about having another extraordinary meeting if necessary.
Would anyone like to comment any further? Councillor Gled. Yeah. So we should receive them in advance of the meeting. If you do wish to ask questions going forward, then more than happy for you to do so.
So just from my point of view, just listen to this conversation. How can I predict what was going to be brought up in this meeting to then ask you the questions? I haven't got a crystal ball to know what's going on in this meeting until I attend it. So it's relevant to the questions on the points that have been made today, but I then can't ask a question that's actually relevant to what's being discussed.
The agenda is published 7 days in advance on the council's website and freely available to the public.
But the answers are in the meeting, aren't they? So the questions come from what answers are given in the meeting.
Well, I mean, the questions come from the agenda items. We ask questions and you have the same opportunity to do so. If you want to ask a question at a future meeting, then you can submit it in advance, and I'm more than happy for you to ask follow-up questions to that question going forward. But that's that. Councillor Gledhill?
Yeah, obviously, Chair, is your discretion whether you allow a resident to, or any member to speak outside of turn of the set agenda. So it would actually be at your discretion to allow a question as you've gone through, or indeed if you just put, as from here, there may well be a question that needs to be submitted for the next meeting, albeit be out of context with the next meeting, which may not have anything to do with this particular item, which then might look a little bit disjointed. So obviously it would just sort of flagging that up, Chair.
Thank you for flagging that. Thank you very much. But we shall continue with the recommendation. It can be found on page 16, 1.1. I'm not going to read it out. Are we all agreed? Agreed. So the final item of the agenda is the Thurrock supported bus services. It can be found on page 21, and I think we're going to Nav.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I've actually forgotten a lot what I was going to say, so I'll keep it brief because it is quite detailed. But set a little bit of background. Thurrock Council provides funding to support 3 bus services within the borough. These are the number 11, the 265 and the 374, and they support a wide range of communities, many of which would not otherwise be served by commercial provision in the market. They were most recently procured in 2018-2019 on a 3-year contract which had the option for a 2-year extension. The extension was undertaken in April 2022 for 1 year, and then there is an option for a further year to take place. The budget for these services was set at £452,000 per annum. However, the extension has exerted a budgetary pressure on the council. When we presented the report earlier this year, that was projected to be up to £100,000, so £100,000. However, with a number of grants that have come in, that has been reduced now to around £18,500 budgetary pressure. This report is to help provide detail to members of this committee to help propose a recommendation towards Cabinet and how to proceed for the next and future years regarding the provision of these services. In undertaking the review of these services, as we were asked to look at whether they provided value for money, we have undertaken a range of consultation, data analysis, in helping to understand what the impact is of these services, which falls under our public sector equality duty. So, starting with that, we have looked at a community equalities impact assessment and identified the protected characteristic groups that would be impacted by changes or withdrawal of these services. We undertook a 12-week public consultation with communities across the borough and made that available both digitally and paper form, and provided various ways for the community to engage and respond to that consultation. And furthermore, we undertook a significant deep dive into the patronage data within the service. When we presented this earlier in the year, in May or June of this year, we only had data to go on that was really impacted by the pandemic. Subsequently, we've been able to look at a 12-month period at how these services are used over a period that isn't actually impacted by the pandemic, and to help understand how the services are used. We have identified that through this, the community groups that would most be impacted in terms of the characteristics are people who are older, who make up over 50% of passengers on these services, women and people with disabilities, and just for your information, those that are given bus passes, about 10% of those are provided on the basis of disability. The reasoning behind why these services are utilised in particular is for accessing shopping and retail leisure facilities, visiting friends and family, and also accessing healthcare. And if there were withdrawal of these services, these would most significantly impact some of our more rural communities, such as Balvin, Horndon on the Hill, East Tilbury and East Tilbury Village, Linford, West Tilbury, North Stifford and Fobbing. The report also identified what the level of budgetary pressure there would be on the council if these services are extended by a further 12 months. As I said at the beginning, this year, 1 year extension was roughly £100,000 in addition to what was previously budgeted. We were fortunate to receive a number of grants in the post-COVID era from the Department for Transport. That is unlikely to be received again next year. With the other inflationary pressures that are out there, we are looking at a further cost increase of somewhere between 6 and 18%, which can be as much as an additional £200,000, which is not funded currently and would then create that additional budgetary pressure. From there, when we were at the meeting last time, we were asked to put forward a number of options that we could look at, and we have identified a number of considerations that you may wish to consider and to propose to members of the Cabinet. That includes an option to withdraw the services, which would create a saving for the council of £452,000 per year. To do nothing and maintain the services as they are, which would have an increased budgetary pressure. To keep just one of those three services, and that may be one service as is or an amended version, which would utilise some of that budget but also create a saving. To either increase one of those that would maximise the budget that is there, or a fifth option, which was identified through the consultation work, is that the cost pressures it puts on people to use the other services that are available, to utilise the existing budget that there is, to create a ticketing system that could help limit the daily cost of travel where people are having to move across the borough using public transport. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. Nav, I'll go straight to Councillor Watson.
Can I just ask a quick question? Obviously, these bus routes for me are used mainly by elderly people, getting around, especially coming out the villages, and especially obviously going through Purfleet because that's isolated on its own, and so is Averley. The thing I wanted to ask is, have you done any other forecasts? Like, instead of having a bus running 7 days a week, have you looked at the forecast running 4 days a week per route? So have you done different forecasts and options?
So we haven't looked at the alternatives in terms of how that provision would be provided, because we were looking at the value of money that this provides. There is that option to ask us to go away and to look at all those various different opportunities. In reality, if we were looking at in terms of reducing the number of days we run, it would just be a proportional cost reduction, because actually the vast majority of the cost in providing the services is in the labour cost and the fuel cost, etc., rather than actually the provision of the bus itself. So we would see that actually you're looking at what next year's cost would be, but having, if that was a 4-day service like the 11 which provides to Purfleet, would be 80% of the existing cost, or next year's budgeted cost would be.
Okay, but would the funding that you receive still be exactly the same?
Yes, the budget is set at £452,000, and that is what there is.
So is that 18,000 that we're overspent then be in that budget envelope?
Sorry, so that 18,000 that we're overspent is
or what we require, what we need. The pressure on the council.
Right. So this year we were fortunate that it's only £18,000 because of the fact that we've been able to receive additional grants. In reality, this year, if it weren't for those grants, it would have been £100,000. Next year, if we were to maintain everything that we have, it could be as much as an additional £200,000.
Councillor Watson.
Okay, I get that, but can we forecast like as smaller day, like shorter service per bus? Can we have a look at that? Also, if you get that now and we reduced it and it goes to the 80%, then that 18,000 that would have been pressure this year has already been swallowed through the grant and everything. So it's a zero net cost, isn't it? This year because you swallowed the 18. But what I'm trying to get at is the next year. Can you forecast it a little bit? Would it? You're making assumptions that we won't get the grant. I get that, but what's the chance of us not getting the grant?
So the grants that we have received this year have been post-COVID grants that have been provided to councils and to bus companies to offset the impact of COVID and the recovery that has been slow recovery of passenger uptake. The Department of Transport already said that the last one received was an extraordinary grant that they weren't planning on giving. So that's where those grants have come from for this year that have made it a lower pressure on the council, and therefore they themselves have said that won't be coming in the future.
Okay, so before we had the COVID grant, what was the overspend for the council then on a normal year?
So prior to the grants, prior to the end of the initial 3-year contract period, the budget was set at £452,000 because that's what the cost of the bus service was. The bus company themselves, as I said at the last meeting, hadn't increased their costs at all over that 3-year period. In that time frame, there have been significant cost rises that have impacted on the provision of that bus service by the operator. For example, there have been increased cost pressures to accessing parts and tyres, etc., which they have said has been as a result of something like Brexit coming through. There have been increased pressures on drivers, which has been significant. If you recall 12 months ago when there was the fuel problem that was around the country, was sparked by a lack of drivers. All of a sudden, bus drivers are also qualified HGV drivers, and therefore there was this uplift in costs, and the bus companies were not able to keep the bus drivers, had to increase the pay for them. That was significant. So there's been a number of increasing costs to bus service providers, and that was no longer sustainable for the bus operator at the cost that was in the original 3-year contract. Hence, when that extension came, they needed to provide that, have that follow-on. We needed to continue to provide that service.
So, thanks. So I think for me, it's like most of these bus services, as I said, the villages, which are quite isolated anyway. Most of those that sit in the villages are the elderly. They use these bus routes. I know it's discretionary, mostly probably to do their shopping and go to hospital. So for me, I'm cutting the service, and I'm also cutting the legs from like more of the elderly population that doesn't drive to be able to get to where they are. So what do you recommend then that we can put in place to help these people?
So we have tried to be outwardly explicit in the report that these are the communities and these are the people that would be impacted by these services. We have tried to set out that there are a number of implications that are at play. There is the budgetary side of it that impacts the council, and there is the impact that it has on the communities. We have set out that there are options within this report that could be explored further, in terms of, as we said, option 3 looks at maintaining one service, but providing, in terms of how we provide that would need to be looked into further, and depending on what the outcome of the decision, bigger decisions, how we could do that. We did set out that in reality the communities that are most impacted and don't have alternative provision are further to the east of the borough, which is the 374 service. We have had a very quick look. We jotted it down here in terms of actually how can you provide that bus to get around. The longer you make that bus service, the less frequently it can run, the less attractive it becomes, the less revenue it generates, and then that adds to budget pressure. If we were to flip it around the other way, as I said, the staffing cost is there. So even if you had shorter services, lots of it doesn't really save money either.
Matt, under the transport strategy, you were looking at alternative bus routes as part of the wider regeneration on the local plan as well, because of the amount of houses that we are looking to build. So if that's the case, what are you looking at that will service the villages as well as like the option of bus 11?
Yes, through the transport strategy we identified the longer term aspiration to deliver better public transport services, serving new growth locations, either becoming commercially viable as a result of the additional housing that's built, therefore the extra patronage that runs on those services, or through initial developer contribution to pay for services up front. It is something that we've identified within the strategy for public transport and mass rapid transit to be explored as something that is needed to support our growth aspirations. It does become a balance then between, can that be commercially viable, or does it require developer contribution? The commercially viable aspect comes in from the number of additional houses built and patronage going up as a result, and ensuring that the network and the provision is done in such a way that it becomes more prioritised in terms of bus priority, reliability, and all the things that make a bus more attractive to users. So the longer term strategy is looking at the growth aspirations and how we link better public transport, not just bus, but all of the other aspects as well, and the active travel kind of programme as well, linking into new growth. And the kind of the elements that need to be brought together to make that happen in terms of it becoming a viable network that can be delivered.
Councillor Gledhill.
You always know it's good when I've got nearly as many pages of questions and stuff on this one report than we've had in the previous two reports. Indeed, the Equality Impact Assessment report on this is larger than the previous two reports. I'll start off with the good bits. The way you've done the consultation is brilliant. I've got to say, this is the first time I've seen a consultation that pretty much ticks every single box when it comes to the ability for people to interact. So that's on the bus, you know, where to get hold of it on the bus routes, text, you know, everything. So that really has got to be congratulated. So well done. That's pretty much everything that I can say that is absolutely 100% good. I am really, really concerned about this report. When we go back to how some of these bus services were started, they were started from calls from elected members, irrespective of whether it be previous Perfleet West Thurrock councillors or Corringham and Fobbing councillors. And every time it's been, these will be put on for a period of time. It will be assessed. And if it's not financially viable and we can't afford it, they will be taken away. Indeed, certainly with the Corringham and Fobbing one, the councillor who brought that forward as pretty much a maiden speech said it's now down to residents to use it or lose it. It doesn't appear to me some of these are being used. It does seem some of these are being used as convenience where there is other bus services available. So if we look through the report, I'm not going to go through all these questions, could be here all night. There are a lot of the journeys are from Basildon Hospital to Basildon Town Centre and Basildon Town Centre to Basildon Hospital. Two things about that: they're not in Thurrock, and it's one journey. It's literally one stop. Now, if you think the average, the mean average journey, sorry, it was one journey. The mean average journey support is £5 something. That's a hell of a lot of support for one stop, which is outside of the borough. I did a quick calculation. I got bored in the end. It was over 10,000. It's earning towards 20,000 of stuff that's not even paid for in this borough. But more importantly, there are other bus services that are there that can support those journeys, and that's the same with other ones. I had to use Thurrock Hospital last week. I jumped on the 88. There are other buses available, but I jumped on the 88. It wasn't that busy. I got confused as I came out of the hospital as to what side of the road to stay on. The Nibs bus went past. There were 2 people on it. One of them was driving. The Nibs bus went past again because, as I say, I was on the wrong side of the road. And there were 3 people on it, including the driver. There doesn't appear to be an awful lot of usage all of the time. I do actually echo what Councillor Watson said. We've got some outlying areas of the borough that do need the support, but we've also got Tilbury. We've also got the bottom end of Little Thurrock, which is one of those that's been excluded off of access to some of this because they're beyond that 500 metres. But if you live in Tilbury and you want to go to either of the hospitals, there is no direct bus. You have to go into Grays, and then you have to go to Grays and then go somewhere else. Now, if it's good enough for the good people of Tilbury and Little Thurrock, it's pretty much good enough for everybody to sort of do similar. So whilst I do agree there needs to be some kind of real journey that ticks the boxes of only the bits that are not currently covered by somebody else, there does need to be a bit of an expectation that people will have to get on a bus and then get off a bus and get onto another one, because thousands of people are having to do that already, or thousands of people would have to do that if they use that method of transport. And it's the same, I'm just using those because I know those off the top of my head. Which then brings into option 5. We currently don't have that process. So if you get on at Tilbury, you get off at Grays, then you jump on one of the 3 buses that goes to Thurrock Hospital, you just have to pay the extra. It would be great to bring that in, but I don't think that's something that the council should be responsible for. I think that's something the bus companies need to be talking with each other as to how can they mutually support and do a rover ticket, or back in the shows you how old I am, a rover ticket which is usable. But I think that's something more for the bus companies to do. I am also concerned that some of the journeys, for instance, from Purfleet to Overley, are covered by Section 106 agreement that I used to get every quarter. And it used to be sat there for years and years. That there's money in the Section 106 for a bus service from Purfleet Station to Overley, I think, or it might be on to Ockenden. Has that been tapped into to help cut the costs on this?
So we did look at this because it was raised a number of times. So there is the understanding that is for an additional provision that shouldn't be used to prop up existing services, and also it only provides a limited level of funding that would kind of support that. It doesn't look at the long-term consideration of that. I can't remember off the top of my head the full details of it, but we did look at could it be used, and don't think it fits the criteria.
Yeah, I'd be interested when this comes back again to find out why it doesn't meet the criteria. This is one of those things where we're not thinking as a holistic council. Why would we have a Section 106 agreement that we then can't use to help support a bus service that should be supported? So we've got the Section 106 out of the way. There is an awful lot of detail in this. A lot of detail which kind of contradicts itself in places. Some of it is passengers, then passenger journeys. I know we had the conversation prior to the first report coming out that we need to be really clear about passengers, the number of, and passenger journeys, because it starts off with there's 89,000 passengers. There's actually 89,000 passenger journeys that are made, and I think that's kind of confused it. Some of the report I couldn't actually read, even with my phone on ×2. To read it because it's too small. So can we make sure when something this important comes forward, as I say, there's thousands of people watching this at the moment. There's probably hundreds have downloaded this report and are looking at it going, I can't read that because it's just too small. Okay, it might not be hundreds, it might be 50s, it might be one, but it's still one person. And it is one of the things we're being looked at by the governance review is how can we make this more accessible. But when you do go through some of the detail, when you add in the subsidy from government, and I need to come back on that one, actually some of these journeys, it's not just £5 something, it's £9 and threepence per journey. So is that journey there and another journey back? So if you add on the subsidy costs for someone who's got a concessionary fare pass, obviously that needs to be paid for. We give money to the bus providers, that money comes from us. So if you add that in, because it's still taxpayers' money that's being used for that, it's actually a support of like £9 odd a journey. So is that £9 a journey there and a journey back? So an £18. So it's £18 subsidy for some of these, effectively from the taxpayer in one straight form. Awful lot, especially when you think that one journey from Basildon to Basildon Town Centre. And do we top up that subsidy that we get from government from the local tax pool?
Sorry, the concessionary fare one. No, it comes as one allocation to the council from central government, and that's what's used.
But we don't top that up. We don't, because I know some local authorities having that extra amount in, so they can start using that 8:30
not as
or
far
10
as I'm
o'clock
aware.
or whatever. Okay. No, I was just interested more because, again, lots of information, but that wasn't in there. And the start and finish points, I was very, very confused as to actually, even when you go through the appendices, as to where the most frequent journeys are and what the most used journeys are for. Because if they're from Basildon Hospital to Basildon Town Centre, it kind of gets back to why we're doing that. So when this comes back, and it will have to come back, can we have a little bit more focused information rather than it being pretty much a fantastic scattergun of all the information that you've got?
Before I quickly go to Councillor Allen, it's coming up to 15:15, so are we happy to suspend standing orders to finish off? Okay, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd say all of these services, all of these routes are quite important because two of them, the 11 has got Basildon Hospital in it, the 265's got Alsit in it, if you was to go over and get a blood test. And also the 374, which goes to Basildon. So these are, I think, primarily going to be people seeking health appointments, jumping on these buses. Through the consultation, did we find out how many people were actually travelling on these services to acquire health appointments? And I mean, it goes through a lot of wards, these services, and I think Councillor Watson suggested a reduction in the running of them to lower the cost, but I don't think that's going to be achievable because these health appointments are scattered all through the day, and you can't sort of reduce those services and not be able to fulfil them scattered appointments. I think I mentioned last time, would there be an alternative like a company like Transvaal providing such services to and from the hospital? You did mention on growth aspirations as well, and I think if we're looking towards the future, we've got to be looking at providing additional services because the place is growing at the rate of knots, and if we do aspire to providing them further 32,000 homes, that could be as much as 90,000 people more that come to live in Thurrock. We currently sit on around about, I think, the 180,000 mark. That'd take us well over 250,000 without our own working accident emergency hospital. These people have to go to Basildon. They don't go to Basildon through choice. They have to go there. I'm sure they'd like to come, to an appointment within their own borough of Thurrock, But as we grow at the rate of knots, and we are growing at a rate of knots, we really should be looking, you know, at providing, and I keep saying it, I've said it through a number of committees, that we need to be looking at our own fully working accident and emergency hospital. Meanwhile, whilst, Basildon has to serve such a wide area, these people have got to go there, you know, but not through choice. They've got to go there, you know. So the health appointments, did we get a clear number of people using these services just to acquire appointments at Basildon and Alsip?
So from the consultation, we had 356 respondents, and of those, it was a multiple choice what they used these services for. So specifically for accessing health appointments, it was 64% of those respondents.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gledhill actually pretty much summed up most of what I was going to ask in his bit, so I will keep this brief. But I'm actually subbing on this committee tonight. I was subbing when this was brought to the last committee, the second but last committee, and I believe this report followed after myself, Councillor Anderson, and Councillor Snell and others, but I distinctly remember Councillor Snell saying that there wasn't enough data in the last report, in particularly on two things, and that was the number of unique passengers on the journey and the amount of users that had concessionary bus passes, as they were the two main bits of data that we needed. Instead, we got an 80-odd page report that got. I get that the consultation took place as well, but it's like we've gone a bit overboard here. It would have been really nice to have this concentrated down and had been able to process that data better, because a member of the public is going to look at this and, well, they're going to be bored after the first few pages, I'll be honest. So, but thank you very much. Sorry? But thank you very much.
Okay, do you want to come back on that, Nav? Or no? No. Councillor Watson, we do have unique passenger numbers in there, but I think it's just over 12,000.
I found them eventually.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I actually like your report. I think it's got the impact assessment. I think is really good, because we don't see many of them actually, and I like the way it's presented. The bus routes, I'm really loath for these to go, not just because of the hospitals. It's also about people taking their children to school and doing and going, and in Purfleet they've already got a medical centre and people use that quite a lot, and that service with the 11. So I know what we're saying about the cost, and I absolutely get that, but there must be some alternative, because they are used. The 11 is used extensively, more than the others. Though I would still like to retain the others, and I think we really need to sit and think about the villages, because if you start getting elderly people stuck in villages, then it's quite depressive if they can't go anywhere and housebound. We need to think about that. The other thing, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. I honestly don't know. So when an elderly person uses their Freedom Pass, and that's registered, is there anything we can get back from the government for that, like for each?
So that's actually paid at the outset.
Right, okay.
So it's a very complex formula. I'm not going to pretend that in the one time that I've been in charge of the team that does it, that I have any idea how it actually works. But that's where this £55,000 payment to the bus company comes from. So it's designed to offset the additional expenditure that a bus company would have received when this concessionary pass scheme came in, because you had to factor in who started getting the bus, who wasn't going to get it before, but now that they've got free pass, they do, and those who are now getting a free ticket, but they would have paid otherwise. So it's not a like-for-like payment of it cost, I don't know, £5 for that journey, like-for-like payment. It's a predetermined sum that is allocated at the outset.
And I assume that also takes in consideration the children going to school with their, or the young people going to school with their concessionary passes.
No, that's only for the concessionary passes that fall under the English National Travel Concessionary Scheme. So that is basically anybody who is of pensionable age and those who are given for disability. So anything, if a child was given a pass for travel to school, etc., that comes from separate to these budgets. So we haven't factored that aspect into this because it.
Is that do we have any further question or comment? Councillor Gledhill.
The only comment, Chair, is obviously we've got recommendation which includes having an option with 5 options that have been put forward there. And I will reiterate that there are services, there are parts of these services or a service that needs to be provided that covers for some of it. I think it's called a hub and spoke model, where it comes to a point where people can change onto other services, needs to be actually looked at rather than, well, we'll just amend it and we might or may not increase or decrease and see what happens. I think what we actually do need to see is some form of new route or routes that cover the outlying areas that we do need to cover. We need to cover East Tilbury, goes without saying. We need to cover Corring and Fogging. We need to cover Purfleet. We need to cover North Stifford, Averley. But one of the big things that we don't do across the whole of Essex is very good north-south connections. It's always very much east-west connectivity. So I think that needs to be looked at as part of this. And also the option 5, which, because I don't think these options sort of sit in isolation, option 5 also needs to be added into the option. So we have like 3.1 as amended to try and cover the bits that are not covered by other buses, and that the develop a Thurrock wide fare scheme, which would actually, I think, personally be down to the bus companies to provide that, rather than the council having to chip in and start paying cover all costs. As I say, we don't do it for the people of Tilbury. We don't do it for the people that have Little Thurrock at the bottom. We don't do it for the people of South Stifford and other places. And you're right. I think there should be that one rovery type fare. So I would suggest that it is as outlined, and when it goes forward, I personally think it should come back to this committee rather than at 1.2, with some decent understanding of how can we cover the villages. How can we get them into a hub and spoke system so that if they have to change, and how that hub and spoke system would work with some kind of rover fare for those that have to pay. Of course, those that don't have to pay can just jump on a bus for free.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question. Is there a cost implication to the consultation?
Would have been very minimal. There was a cost implication that was related to the free post provision that we offered, which would have enabled people to send it in. That is, a couple of £100.
Right, and can this,
I don't know what the actual figure is.
Can this carry on? Can the consultation be extended to gain more information, or would we be asking the same questions to the same passengers?
I think so. We had this open for 12 weeks. We very much promoted it, I think, as well as we probably could have, shy of having a marketing team. We actively put posters up in places. We put posters up on the bus service. We told people where they could to submit their paper copy if they wanted to hand it in. We had paper copies that were available. We had the digital version. I think in that time frame, we've probably got as many people as we were probably going to get to do that.
Did our comms teams at all put anything out to the public as well? Yeah?
Yes. We had them involved in this.
apologies. Yeah, it went out 3 times through my thing. Through my newsletter, it went out through the comms, it went through social media, and the fact that Nav's just said it was negligible in cost for what they've delivered, I think really does need to be minuted as a job well done. Perhaps they need to start coming to Nav to do consultations rather than getting an expensive marketing team in, so well done.
Thank you for the report, Nav. Councillor Gledhill has largely mentioned what I was going to say when summing up, but you know, I'll just say that instinctively, I'm not a massive fan of taxpayers subsidising bus services that, if enough people were using, would be commercially viable. And when we look at the figures here, you know, we're looking at a worst case scenario of £800,000 next year. That's just next year. I mean, leave it a couple of years, we're probably looking above £1 million for this. So I'm not massively comfortable with that, but I do recognise there are isolated parts of Thurrock, of our community, that do need this kind of service. I was also quite interested in option 5, developing a Thurrock-wide fare scheme. There's just not a huge amount here on what that would look like. So, as Councillor Gledhill mentioned, some more information, more specific stuff on what an alternative route to cover all 3 would look like, what you know, developing a Thurrock-wide fare scheme would look like, and the outcomes of it would be great. Because at the moment, I'm not certain. I'm having looked at all of those options. I'm not certain that I'm in a massively informed position as to sort of pick and choose or pick and mix me options. I know that was a bit of a statement. You can come back on it if you want. If not,
yeah. So obviously the ticketing scheme is not worked up. But we say that in there, and that, you know, we would need time to actually work that up and actually do that engagement. I think don't want to get sidetracked on it. One of the reasons why I think we need to be central in that ticketing scheme is we know one of our main operators wouldn't really want to play ball on that. That's why there's part of us kind of supporting that. I've forgotten what the rest of the statement was now. Options. Yeah. So we did put in there that if it was recommended to actually come back and have those various options, that we can do that and look at that.
That is what I would like to see personally. I mean, I'll leave the floor open to discuss. Now we're on to the recommendations to see what others think, because there is a specific recommendations that ask us to make recommendations. I don't know how the rest of the committee feel.
Sorry, Chair, I think I've already said it's. Yeah, we've got the 5 options there. Some of them are just not commercially viable, not taxpayer viable, and actually supply a service that's going to actually do anything. I think there does need to be a further report that comes back that does give us a option or options for route or routes that will come into a hub and spoke system into Grays or wherever, that cover the outside villages, and to look at a flat fare or a rover fare, whatever, across the borough. I take on board what Nav said. I think I know who you're talking about as well. But you know, if that doesn't work out as commercially viable, that's beyond the council's remit. You know, that starts becoming either a massive expense to the council taxpayer, which we just can't do, or, you know, actually ideally it should be down to the individual operators. The Mayor of London's quite happy because he's got one bus service. He's got TfL. We've got 3 that would cover this in itself, 4 if you include obviously First as well. So I still think there should be pretty much a hybrid of 3 and 5 as the options to come back here, so we can discuss, so we can properly inform Cabinet where we feel that would be the best way to spend any money that we would spend.
Okay, well, the first recommendation can stay, because it's just to sort of comment on the report. Have you got the recommendation that we'll use, because we'll replace 1.2?
Sorry, Chair, yes, I was noticing that members have made their comments. Are you going to replace 1.2?
Yeah, we're going to replace 1.2 with the recommendation as set out by Councillor Gledhill.
Yeah. 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 So everybody's. Yeah.
Are we all? Are we all?
So. Sorry, Chair. Just to confirm, obviously 1.2 you'd like to replace with Councillor Gledhill's comments that a report is to come back outlining further details with the options, obviously to have either one bus route or to basically give you the options a bit clearer.
Yes. Okay, we were all agreed on that, so we shall move on to the last agenda item, which is the work programme. The next meeting is only in a couple of weeks, so we're probably a little too late to make any amendments or changes to that meeting now. I can't see it on here, and if someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but Councillor Kelly did ask at the last meeting, I think, to add on a report on east-facing slips, I think it was, yeah? Yeah, if we can get that added on to the work programme, that'd be great. And of course, we do have a few more reports coming back. Go on, Matt.
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to east-facing access, there's not much of an update to provide. We did feed that back through Dem Services that probably the timing of it, there's not an awful lot to update on. I have arranged a meeting with National Highways to discuss the next steps in terms of east-facing access and options to be considered. That's not happening with National Highways due to lack of availability until week after next. So it won't meet the December meeting.
That's not if it wasn't to meet the December meeting, that's not a problem. I understand that's just round the corner. But we have got one in late February. And I suspect I'll be adding in another extraordinary meeting at some point. So if we could sort of earmark it for the late February one, and if we approach that and there's still sort of not much to update, then I'm content for a briefing note to be circulated to committee.
Thank you.
Councillor Gledhill.
Just on the work plan, it's actually something that was touched on by Kevin and Mark earlier. I don't know where it's sitting in the programme. I don't want to add something to it. I think if it's going to sit anywhere, it'd probably be local plan update. But obviously, a number of times we've mentioned this evening about making the borough more sustainable as going forward. We all know and this gets really boring, I do apologise, our council tax base is basically a band C. So for every property, the council has to find about another £100 just to break even through savings and everything else. I think as part of this, we need to see how we can increase. So as we move forward with the local plan, that the properties coming forward are a level of council tax that is actually sustainable, rather than there being a funding shortage all the time. I.e., if we have a load of blocks of flats coming at Band B, we're going to have to subsidise by £300 per flat just to break even. So it's about making sure we get those properties in that are Band D, Band E. I think if it sits anywhere, it'll be in the local plan update, the local plan, just so we can. I don't want to add an additional boring item about getting the council tax base up. We do all right for business rates, but council tax is where we are. We fall short. We'll never get a government revaluation. So it's about those properties moving forward and working with the VO to ensure that they are up there, as well as working with developers to make sure they're up to D&E.
Councillor Watson.
And that also ties in with what we were discussing earlier about housing, affordable housing, and all the different sort of products that are out there right now, and what we are programmed to get going forward.
Yep. Democratic Services.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a note, obviously, at the meeting in December, you've got the portfolio holder report from Councillor Maney. The part of the leaders' portfolio also, I believe, comes under this committee, so I didn't know if you would like to schedule in his portfolio holder report to come.
I'm sure the leader would love to come to committee with a portfolio holder report.
I would like to speak. Yeah, of course I would.
Of course he would, yes.
It's been hard me not to say a word.
We'll put that in provisionally for February.
Not one?
Yeah.
More than one you're going to hear from. I guess all night to say something.
Oh, yeah, obviously, yeah. Yeah. Sorry, did you want to say? Kevin?
So, Chair, I just note there's a Tilbury update report due in December. It's just a question, we're still outstanding, well, waiting for information back from the department on the grant situation. We might not have that information by that time. So I'm just thinking, would it be worth waiting for the February committee for the Tilbury update, where we've progressed further design work and we'll have a greater clarity on the next stages? I'm just conscious of that we want to bring that level of detail that members can scrutinise, and it may be that it may be by February we'll have that level, and the members will have the level of information that they've requested. I don't want to disappoint. That's the point I'm trying to make, Chair.
That's not a problem with me. So long as it's got detail in it, I won't be disappointed.
Noted.
Okay. Is committee happy for me to liaise with Democratic Services to get an extraordinary put in early next year? Yes. Yeah. Councillor Watson.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah. The Tilbury Town Fund probably go into February, which means we've got a gap sitting in December. So I wonder if the portfolio holder for growth is about.
Chair, I'm not sure that the report, the agenda for that meeting is due to be published later this week. So I don't think it's going to. I don't think the actual report is going to be able to make that agenda.
I don't.
Well, okay, then can we please come to the extraordinary meeting that you're going to arrange?
I'm going to arrange. Councillor Coxall.
I'm very happy to come to a January meeting, and then I think we can actually achieve a portfolio holder meeting. It's been nearly 2 years without missed a full council meeting, maybe 3. And the item of Tilbury could come to, I think if we come to like before Christmas, that could come into that extraordinary meeting. Just make it's not an extraordinary meeting, make it a January meeting and a February meeting. But I'm very happy to do January if we can get the report. Like, even if it's a verbal update with a small report, I'm happy to take the questions that you've been asking, especially tonight. I can hear.
Then that is what we will do. Are there any further questions or comments?
Subject to, obviously, if we get the government comes back for Tilbury, I think that paper can come. I would have thought, Kevin, can't it? If we get an answer before Christmas, I think we have the possibility to get a Tilbury paper to a January meeting.
Yeah. Are there any questions or comments on the work programme from officers? Any concerns? No, good. Okay, then the meeting is finished. Have a nice evening.